The distress signal flickered against the void, weak and faltering, a digital whisper lost in the endless black. It wasn't supposed to be here, this deep, this far from the established routes. Jak Turner, sitting in the dim glow of his repair bay on Ravager's Haven, glanced up at the flashing alert on his screen. He ran a hand through grease-slicked hair and frowned. Nothing good ever came from an unscheduled emergency ping. Outside, the station stretched out in a maze of rusted hulls and flickering neon. A half-forgotten outpost where scavengers and mercenaries eked out their lives, trading in stolen tech and favors. Jak wasn't much different. A mechanic by trade, a survivor by necessity. He fixed ships, no questions asked. But this was something else. He activated the external scanners, fingers flying across the console. The signature was faint, but unmistakable, Varik tech. That made his stomach tighten. The Varik were predators, towering wolf-like aliens with a warrior culture so strict they made old human warlords look soft. And their ships? Living things bonded to their pilots. If one was limping toward the station, it meant someone had bled for it. Then the impact came. A metallic shriek reverberated through the hangar as the vessel slammed down, skidding across the deck in a shower of sparks. Atmosphere hissed from ruptured seams. Plasma vents belched dying embers. The ship, sleek, black, its surface rippling as if breathing, lay broken. It shouldn't have made it this far. Jak was on his feet before he could second-guess himself, moving toward the wreck with a toolkit strapped across his back. The bay doors shuttered closed behind him as he approached the twisted hull. He could hear it beneath the crackle of sparking conduits. The ship was in pain. Not just damaged, wounded. He placed a hand against the sleek metal and felt the tremor beneath his palm, a rhythmic thrum like a failing heartbeat. He drew his plasma cutter and began slicing his way in. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the acrid tang of burning circuitry. The cockpit was a ruin. Biomechanical tendrils hung limp, severed from their central core. And slumped against the control interface was the pilot. Varik, no doubt about it. A massive creature, silver fur matted with dark fluid, a deep gash running along its side. His chest rose and fell in uneven shudders, each breath a struggle. Jak hesitated. This wasn't a repair job anymore. This was a risk, the kind that got people killed. A low growl rumbled from the Varik's throat. Golden eyes flickered open, hazy with pain but still burning with that unmistakable, predatory awareness. Jak exhaled. Yeah, I know. I shouldn't be here. He crouched beside the controls, scanning the interface. The ship was more than just metal and wires. It was alive, connected to its pilot in ways human ships couldn't replicate. But Jak had seen enough wrecks to recognize failing life support. The Varik bared its teeth in something between a snarl and a grimace. "You touch my ship," Jak snorted, already pulling open a panel. "Relax, big guy. Either I fix this, or you both die." The growl deepened, but the Varik didn't stop him. That was as close to permission as he was going to get. Jak's hands moved quickly, bypassing fried circuits, rerouting power where he could. The ship's neural system twitched under his touch. It wasn't rejecting him. Strange. Usually, Varik ships outright refused interference from anyone but their bonded pilot. "What happened?" Jak asked, keeping his voice level. A ragged breath. Ambushed. 3 vessels. Outgunned. A cough. More dark fluid pooling beneath him. Escaped. Barely. Jak pressed his lips into a thin line. He didn't ask who had done it. The Varik had plenty of enemies. He focused instead on stabilizing the failing core, patching it together with scavenged human tech. The ship shuddered, its structure shifting instinctively, adjusting to his makeshift repairs. The Varik's gaze locked onto him. something calculating in those golden depths. "You are not afraid." Jack didn't look up. "Should I be?" The silence stretched, heavy. "Then, yes." Jack smirked. Noted. The ship hummed beneath his fingers, the power stabilizing, at least for now. He stepped back, wiping his forehead. "You're not flying out of here tonight. Not unless you want to fall apart mid-jump." The Varik shifted, muscles tensing, but he winced as pain rippled through him. "Stubborn. I will not stay here." Jack shrugged. "Then die out there. Your call." He turned toward his workstation, already pulling out more tools. "But if you want to live, I can patch up your ship by morning." A long pause. Then the Varik exhaled, a sound that might have been reluctant acceptance. Jack didn't know it then, but this was the moment everything changed. Jack worked through the night, his hands coated in biomechanical residue as he wove together the shattered neural lattice of Varesh's ship. The damage was worse than he had initially thought. Deep structural fractures, severed power conduits, and a failing core that was barely clinging to life. The ship responded sluggishly, reluctant yet desperate, like a wounded animal unsure whether to trust the hand that sought to mend it. Varesh watched from a makeshift cot Jack had dragged in from the side of the bay. His golden eyes never left Jack, as if studying his every move, calculating. He was healing, but not fast enough. Jack knew from the way the Varik clenched his jaw against the pain that he was still dangerously close to the edge. "You're not just a mechanic," Varesh said finally, his voice rough from exertion. Jack didn't look up. "I get that a lot. Not many can touch a Varik ship and make it listen." Jack paused, his fingers tightening around a set of precision tools. "Yeah, well, I'm not most people." Varesh exhaled sharply, something between a huff and a grudging acknowledgement. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional crackle of a welding torch and the soft hum of the ship's core stabilizing under Jack's repairs. Then came a knock. 3 sharp raps against the metal bay door. Too deliberate, too precise. Jack stilled. His gut told him before his brain caught up. This wasn't station security. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and exchanged a glance with Varesh, whose ears had perked, his muscles tensed despite his wounds. Jack grabbed the nearest wrench, then hit the control panel to open the door. 2 men stood outside, backlit by the neon glow of the station corridors. They weren't locals. Their gear was too clean, too functional. Mercenaries. The taller one had the look of someone who'd snapped more than a few bones in his time, and the shorter one had a twitchy, trigger-happy air that put Jack immediately on edge. The tall one stepped forward, voice calm but edged with menace. "Turner, we hear you've got something that doesn't belong to you." Jack didn't blink. "Sorry, don't take requests." The shorter one smirked. "See, that's the thing. We're not asking." Varesh was on his feet before Jack could process the movement. Injured or not, the Varik was still a predator, and his golden eyes burned with the kind of cold fury that made lesser men rethink their life choices. The mercenaries hesitated. They had come expecting an injured alien, not a storm wrapped in muscle and claws. The taller one reached for his weapon. Jack moved first. The wrench cracked against the short one's jaw with a sickening crunch, sending him sprawling. The tall one had just enough time to swear before Varesh lunged. Claws raked across armor, slicing through reinforced plating like paper. Blood splattered against the metal walls, and the mercenary crumpled, gasping. Jack exhaled. Well, that escalated. Varesh wiped his claws against his tattered sleeve, his expression unreadable. "They were hunting me." Jack crouched beside the downed mercenary, rifling through his pockets until he found what he suspected, an encrypted data chip. He turned it over in his fingers. "Not just you. They knew I had your ship. Someone wants you dead bad enough to send hired guns." Varesh studied him for a long moment. Then he said, You should walk away. Jack laughed, short and sharp. Yeah? And let these bastards torch my bay. He shook his head. Not how I work. Varesh's ears flicked, something unreadable passing through his gaze. This is not your fight. Jack met his stare. It is now. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the ship's humming core and the slow, pained breathing of the unconscious mercenary on the floor. Then Varesh nodded, something almost approving in his expression. Jack sighed and grabbed a length of cable. Help me tie these guys up. We need answers. Jack tightened the restraints around the mercenary's wrists, securing the man to a support beam in the hangar. The shorter one was still unconscious, a trail of dried blood running from his busted lip. The taller one, the leader, glared at them both. His breathing labored from Varesh's earlier attack. You've made a mistake, the mercenary growled. You don't know who you're messing with. Jack leaned in, his expression dry. Yeah? And who am I messing with? The mercenary bared his teeth in something that wasn't quite a grin. You think this is about some random bounty? This is bigger than you, mechanic. Bigger than both of you. His gaze flicked to Varesh, assessing, calculating. Your Varik friend here has some powerful enemies. Varesh crouched, his golden eyes narrowing. Name them. The mercenary smirked, but said nothing. Jack sighed and stood, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He wasn't the torturing type, but he also wasn't the type to let a threat sit unanswered. Instead, he turned, rifling through the mercenary's pockets again. A small data pad. He flipped it on and scanned the encrypted details. The contract was listed under a single name, Varesh-Tal. The payout was obscene, enough to buy an entire fleet of ships. Jack frowned. That's not a standard bounty. That's an execution order. Varesh stiffened. The mercenary chuckled darkly. Guess your friend's more important than you thought. Jack met Varesh's gaze. What the hell did you do? Varesh didn't answer immediately. His ears flicked, tail curling tightly around his leg. And for the first time since meeting him, Jack saw something that looked like hesitation. I refused an order, Varesh said finally, his voice low. My people value honor above all else. The High Command ordered me to slaughter an outpost of unarmed civilians. I did not. Jack stared at him. You deserted? Varesh nodded once. My refusal made me a traitor. Jack exhaled sharply. So they put a death mark on you. Varesh didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The pieces clicked together in Jack's head. The Varik weren't just hunting Varesh. They were making an example out of him. A lesson in blood for anyone who might think of breaking rank. And they weren't sending amateurs. They were hiring outside hands, mercenaries who specialized in hunting people down, no matter how far they ran. Jack let out a breath. Well, that's a hell of a mess you dragged me into. Varesh's expression darkened. I never asked for your help. Jack scoffed, shoving the data pad into his pocket. Yeah, but you got it anyway. He turned back to the mercenary, his voice hardening. How many more are coming? The mercenary grinned, teeth bloody from Varesh's earlier strike. You won't see them coming. Varesh growled low in his throat. Then you are useless. The mercenary had a second to react before Varesh struck, a sharp, controlled blow to the side of his head. He slumped unconscious. Jack sighed. Great. Now we're on a timer. Varesh flexed his claws. We need to leave. Jack hesitated. This was his home. Grimy, rusted, full of people who'd stab him in the back for a credit chip, but still his. Running wasn't in his nature. But staying meant waiting for an inevitable fight, one he wasn't sure they could win. He exhaled. Fine, but we don't run blind. He strode to the control panel on the wall, fingers dancing over the interface as he pulled up the station's external sensors. A pulse scan revealed what he had feared. Multiple incoming ships, their signatures scrambled, moving fast. Jack muttered a curse. We've got less than an hour before they get here. Varesh turned to his ship. It can fly. Jak ran a hand through his hair. Technically. Varesh gave him a sharp look. Jak lifted his hands. Hey, I put that thing back together with scraps and a prayer. It'll fly, but I can't promise it won't shake apart if you push it too hard. Varesh considered, then nodded. It will do. Jak hesitated. You have a plan? Varesh's expression was unreadable. I will not run forever. That wasn't exactly an answer, but Jak didn't press. Instead, he moved quickly, gathering what little gear he could. Tools, spare power cells, a handful of rations. He cast one last glance around the hangar. This place had been his life, a patchwork existence built on routine and grit. Now he was walking away from it, all for an alien he barely knew. Maybe he was losing his mind. A warning klaxon blared through the station. The mercenaries had signaled their incoming reinforcements. Jak turned to Varesh. Time's up. Varesh was already moving, stepping into his cockpit with a natural grace that belied his injuries. The ship responded immediately, the living metal pulsing under his touch. Jak followed, slipping into the co-pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. The hangar doors groaned as they began their sluggish, automatic opening sequence. Beyond them, the station's docking bay was already in chaos. Mercenary reinforcements stormed in, weapons drawn. Jak muttered another curse. They got here faster than expected. Varesh's hands tightened over the controls. Then we fight. The ship trembled as its systems roared to life. Outside, gunfire erupted. The mercenaries were already opening fire, bullets and plasma bolts ricocheting off the reinforced plating of the bay walls. Jak's fingers tightened around the flight controls. Varesh met his gaze. Fly, mechanic. Jak didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the throttle forward. The ship lunged. Jak's hands were shaking as he piloted the ship out of the station's atmosphere, the metal groaning under the barrage of fire from behind. The hangar doors were barely wide enough to fit them, and as he punched the throttle, the ship's engines screamed in protest. Their pursuers weren't far behind. Mercenaries hired to track them down and bring them back to a cold, calculated justice. Jak's mind raced, calculating trajectories and possible escape routes, all while his body worked on autopilot. Every nerve screamed, urging him to make it out of this alive. The ship jolted as another blast hit, but this time it wasn't just the hull creaking. It was the whole damn structure. It wasn't just a bad repair job. It was a hastily patched-together vessel that wasn't meant to handle this kind of punishment. The shields were beginning to flicker and die under the relentless onslaught. Jak cursed under his breath. Shit, we're not going to make it at this rate, he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls, trying to reroute power to the shields. Varesh's voice was low, tense. We must push forward. There is no turning back now. Jak's eyes flicked to the Varik in the co-pilot's seat. The warrior was focused, his golden eyes scanning the radar. He looked like a predator, poised for action. But Jak could see the weariness in him now, the physical toll that the earlier battle had taken. Even though Varesh never showed it, the Varik was hurting, and it made Jak nervous. A wounded animal was always more dangerous, but it could also be a liability. How many more ships are tailing us? Jak asked, his voice clipped. 3, maybe more. We must lose them before we reach the asteroid field. Jak's mind raced. The asteroid field was their only chance at survival, if they could get there. It was a maze of jagged rocks and debris, an inhospitable place for anyone who wasn't familiar with its intricacies. Jak wasn't a pilot by profession, but he'd spent enough time in space to know how to navigate it. Hang on, Jak said, slamming the ship into a sharp turn. The engines screamed as they burned fuel in a desperate attempt to outrun their attackers. The ship swerved, dodging a plasma bolt that exploded just behind them. He could feel the heat even through the reinforced hull. Jack's eyes darted to the redoubts. They had a few minutes at best before the mercenaries were on them again. The station's defenses would be useless now that they were out of range, and the asteroid field was still a couple of light years away. He turned to Varesh, his jaw set tight. If we don't make it there in one piece, we're both dead. The Varik nodded, his gaze unwavering, but his lips curled into something that might have been a smile, a rare, fleeting expression. Then we fight. That is what we do. Jak gritted his teeth and pushed the ship harder. He could see the asteroid field on the horizon now, a vast expanse of space littered with chunks of rock, each one a potential obstacle. It would be difficult for their pursuers to track them in there, but it would be even harder for Jak to navigate it without risking a crash. "Brace for impact," Jak shouted, slamming the ship into another evasive maneuver, sending them into a spiraling dive toward the asteroid field. The ship jerked violently, the hull groaning under the strain. Jak's teeth rattled as he fought to regain control. The sound of incoming fire filled the cockpit, but Jak didn't dare look. He couldn't afford to take his eyes off the readouts or the steering console. "We're not going to make it," Jak shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "We can't outrun them, Varesh." "We don't need to outrun them," Varesh said, his voice steady, unshaken by the chaos around them. "We just need to survive long enough to escape." Jak's gaze flicked to him. The Varik was focused, his claws digging into the seat as he braced for impact. He was determined, unflinching, but Jak could see the edges of exhaustion in his eyes. Varesh had already fought battles that Jak could only imagine, but this was something else. This was desperation. The ship jolted again, this time much harder. A loud bang echoed through the cockpit, and the lights flickered. Jak cursed under his breath as the ship shuddered. They were losing more than just power. They were losing structural integrity. He pushed the controls forward, narrowly dodging an asteroid that shot past them at breakneck speed. The ship swerved again, the engine sputtering as it fought to keep up. Varesh was already on his feet. "We need to make it into the field." Jak nodded, his fingers flying over the console as he initiated a manual override to reroute the power. The ship's control systems blinked back to life, though weakly, and he fought to regain control. They were close now, close enough to reach the asteroid field, but not without more damage. A missile whizzed by, so close that Jak felt the heat from the blast. He didn't have time to react. The ship's shields flickered once more and then went dark. They were wide open. "Hold tight," Jak muttered through gritted teeth. The ship lurched as it entered the asteroid field. It was a chaotic maze of moving rocks, each one a deadly trap, but Jak knew this space like the back of his hand. He dove into the field, weaving through debris, narrowly avoiding collisions that would have destroyed the ship. The mercenaries, however, weren't as skilled. They followed with reckless abandon, eager to end the chase. "Now," Varesh said, his voice a low growl. Jak didn't need to ask what he meant. He slammed the ship into a sharp turn, using the asteroid field's chaos to his advantage. The mercenaries were too focused on the ship ahead to see the trap closing in on them. Jak gritted his teeth and, with a final push, launched them into the heart of the field, weaving between massive chunks of rock, each one a deadly obstacle. Behind them, the mercenaries were closing in, but they couldn't match Jak's maneuverability. One of their ships slammed into an asteroid, sending it careening off course, and another exploded as it collided with a piece of debris. The remaining ship, damaged but still intact, hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure of whether to continue the chase. But Jak knew the field wouldn't protect them forever. They were running out of options, and the ship's systems were failing fast. "We need to find a place to hide," Jak said, his voice tight with urgency. Varesh nodded. "There is an abandoned outpost ahead. We can make it there, but we must hurry. Jak didn't need any more encouragement. He pushed the throttle forward one last time, aiming for the outpost. They were far from safe, but it was their only chance. As the ship tore through the asteroid field, Jak felt a strange sense of resolve settle over him. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about seeing this through, about making sure Varesh lived to see another day, and maybe, just maybe, about finding a way out of this chaos for both of them. The ship veered toward the abandoned outpost, its dilapidated structures looming in the distance. The mercenaries, still in pursuit, had no idea what was waiting for them. Jak didn't look back. He was focused on the narrow passage between the rocks that would take them into safety. This was it, the moment of truth.